All right, so I'm out here now trying out these new Freewell. These are the new ND, variable ND filters. Now, if you guys are new to my channel, I've definitely done a lot of ND filter reviews as well as how to dial them in. So if you guys want to check this out, make sure you guys check above. I'll also leave some links down below. Here, I just want to test out, these are the new variable ones. So if you're not familiar with variable ND filters, so these are a standard set of filters which normally range from like anything from an ND4, 8, 16, 32, 64, 128, all the way up to, you know, ND 2000 if you like doing long exposure photography. Like a lot of people will say, and I've said in many of my older videos too, they're really just sunglasses, I guess, for your drone or for your camera. I'm actually using an ND filter on my camera right now, which is actually the Freewell one ND64. All ND filters is really doing is darkening up your image. That way you're able to properly expose for the settings you need or you want. And the reason why you're gonna change your settings is so that you can ideally have not only some natural blur in your video. So if you guys haven't seen my previous video on this exact filter I'm using on my camera, I talked to you a little bit more about what the shutter speed difference and what it affects your video. Make sure you guys check out that video above. It'll explain a little bit more about the effects of a slow versus a fast shutter speed when you're shooting video. So for instance, I'm shooting here 4K at 30 frames a second. Then if I want some natural motion blur in my video, I ideally want to be about 1/60th of a shutter speed. And here I'm actually using an ND64 at 2.8. So it actually gives me a little bit of separation, so a little bit of blurry background. So if you're a 4K at 24 shooter, you're going to want to dial in your shutter speed to 1/50. And if you're a 30 frames a second shooter, you're going to want your shutter speed to be at 1/60th. But the problem is if you don't have any ND filters, especially on days like this where it's really bright, you're gonna have to crank that shutter speed up really high, like 1/1000, 1/2000 of a second in order for you to get that exposure properly exposed. But even though you are able to adjust your aperture, you don't always want to crank it all the way up or all the way down, because there's normally sweet spots. And I believe with the Mavic 2 Pro, the normal sweet spot is around that f4.5, f5.6 range. When you start going up too high, some of the footage gets a little mushy. The only way you could properly dial that in is to introduce filters to your camera, to your lens of your drone. And in the case of Freewell gear, they came out with this one, which is a variable ND, which will now give you, with one filter put on there, you can now adjust it, but just by turning it, to give you a range that's very similar to an ND filter that you'd be using otherwise, like an ND4, ND8, ND16, ND32. All of that ranges from 4, 6, 4, 8, 16, 32, so you don't always have to carry a full set of filters. You can actually put on one filter that'll cover a range of 4, 8, and ND16, and you put on the higher filter, which they have here, which is an ND 6 to 9, so that'll actually cover your ranges between like 32, 64, 128. So as you can see here, it's a super bright day, and you know, just without even having to go through the bag, I'm more than likely gonna have to probably put on somewhere around an ND 32, I would assume, to try to get the proper exposure that I'm looking for, which is gonna be, I'm gonna shoot at 4K at 30 frames a second. But the great thing about these is it's really just trying to help you simplify your kit. So, you know, by having only 2 on you, it's pretty nice if it's able to cover the range and if the quality is good. So let's power everything on and see kind of what the camera sees in auto, just to see exactly what our current exposure is at the moment. Look at that. Look at that. All right, so I'm at a no-fly zone. I'm probably gonna walk right down here, and I probably will be out of the no-fly zone. So let's walk. Damn. I am right at the edge of a no-fly. I'm gonna see if I can actually walk just right over here to see if I'm able to get into a fly zone. Oh, just outside. Got a little compass calibration I gotta do. Ooh, it's hot today. Calibrate. Turn it on. Turn it. And so if you're still not familiar with why a higher and slower shutter speed makes a difference, the higher the shutter speed, if you're shooting at 1/500, 1/1000, 1/2000th of a second, remember that everything in a video is frame by frame. So each one of those frames is going to be very freeze frame or still. And when you make that sequential into a video, all of those still images now start looking very sharp, and it could start looking jittery. So ideally, like I mentioned before, let's just go into the middle ground at 5.6. ISO 100, you always want to keep your ISO as low as possible so you don't have any noise in your footage. Let's go ISO 100 and let's go to aperture 5.6. All right, so now I have the variable ND This is the lighter of the two, so there's two sets that go from the 2 to 5 and then 6 to 9. Right now, this is at the lighter of the two. Right now, it's at the strongest setting though. It's at the 5 marker. So right now, if I look at using a 5 marker, my exposure is pretty much spot on. Now let me twist it to show you the difference. So as you can see my histogram at the bottom left, it's exactly where I want to be, right in the middle. And I have my settings at f5, and I have my ISO 100, so the best quality. And then I have my shutter speed at 1/60th, which is exactly where I want to be because I'm shooting at 4K at 30 frames a second. But just to show you the difference, if I were to turn it, so let me keep it here, and now I'm going to turn it the other way. Now if I turn that dial all the way to the 2 setting, that's actually giving me something around like an ND4. And now with an ND4, as you can see in my video, it is overexposed. And if I get my hand up here, so now this is actually at 1/60th ISO 100 and with my aperture at f5. Now I'll just do that sample hand test. So if I'm just waving you just like that, you can see natural motion blur. Ideally in the video, you can see my hand kind of blurring out. So with that said, let's hit record. Let's get this up in the air. Freewell gear, variable ND, just gives you a little bit of some options while you're up in the air. Fine tune your exposure. For a day like this, I was able to use the lighter of the two, but if you have a very, very bright day, you're shooting in a desert, snow, and other things, a lot stronger one here as well. And thanks to Freewell for sending me these to test out. This is the variable ND for the Mavic 2 Pro. All the information for these products will be down below in the video description, as well as my case and the lanyard and all the other stuff that I normally would use. It'll be down in the video description. So make sure you guys check this out if you're interested in some of these products.